The last straw came on a Tuesday morning. I was halfway through prepping for a presentation when my phone buzzed. Mom again. I had already ignored 3 calls and 2 guilt-ridden texts from her that morning, all filled with variations of the same line. "You're our last hope, Sam. You can't just abandon us." I silenced the screen and turned my focus back to my laptop. But then a notification popped up. Group chat. Family. It wasn't just her anymore. My younger brother Josh chimed in, "Can't believe you're seriously leaving us hanging after everything." Then came the cherry on top from my dad. "If you walk away from this, you're no son of mine." That one hit harder than I wanted to admit. I leaned back in my chair, staring blankly at the glowing screen. Just 24 hours earlier, they had asked me, no, expected me, to wire over $78,000 to cover their emergency debts. Credit cards, shady loan payments, a second mortgage I hadn't even known existed. They said they needed help. But this wasn't help. This was a pattern, a history, years of bad choices and me cleaning up the mess. This time I said no. And in return, they cut me off. They didn't just cut me off emotionally. They did it publicly, too. Relatives heard I'd abandoned the family. Facebook filled with vague guilt posts. Even my aunt texted me asking how I could let my parents drown. That was the moment I realized something with perfect clarity. They never saw me as a son. I was a bank account with a birthday. They weren't angry because I said no. They were angry because I realized I had the right to. And now that I was out, they wanted to make sure I stayed out, humiliated, ashamed, and maybe desperate enough to crawl back. But what they didn't know? I wasn't going to disappear. They thought they could disown me and move on. What they failed to realize was simple. I don't go down quietly. My full name is Samuel Lee. Sam to anyone who actually knows me. I'm 29 years old, a CPA by trade, and until recently I spent my entire life believing that loyalty meant sacrifice, especially to family. Growing up, I was the responsible one. My parents loved telling anyone who'd listen that I came out of the womb organized. Straight A's, part-time jobs, tutoring other kids on the weekend. Meanwhile, my younger brother Josh barely scraped by, always finding himself through impulsive hobbies that somehow involved draining our parents' credit cards. My mom used to say I was the rock of the family. That might have been true, but what she never acknowledged was this. A rock doesn't bend. It breaks. My parents were never abusive in the screaming, slamming doors sense. They were subtler than that. Every decision they made, every lie, every bit of pressure, was wrapped in the velvet glove of obligation. When I got into a state university on full scholarship, they were proud. But they also asked if I could send part of my stipend back home. "Just a little," Mom said. "Groceries are tight this month." When Dad's car needed repairs, I used my internship paycheck. When Josh flunked out of his first college and needed money to enroll in another, I co-signed the loan. That was the beginning of the debt spiral. Not mine. Theirs. I started noticing red flags in my early 20s. Credit card bills with minimum payments barely made. Payday loan emails forwarded to my inbox by mistake. Mom crying quietly in the kitchen at Thanksgiving when she thought no one noticed. I offered to help budget, to teach them how to manage cash flow, to consolidate. But they didn't want advice. They wanted rescue. And I kept giving it, year after year. It wasn't until I bought my first apartment, modest, 1-bedroom, nothing flashy, that the dynamic shifted. I finally said no to one of Dad's requests. A temporary loan to cover their second mortgage payment. He called it a bridge. I called it a sinkhole. He didn't speak to me for a month after that. When he did, it was only to ask for something else. I kept a spreadsheet of every favor I'd been asked to give. Over 6 years, the total added up to $112,000. Some of it was in my name. Some of it was money I never expected back. They never said thank you. Not really. The gratitude always came wrapped in guilt. I don't know what we'd do without you. You're such a good son. We raised you right. Each line sounded sweet until I realized it was just another tool. Praise used as a leash. And Josh? He floated between half jobs, low-level MLM schemes, and the occasional couch surfing stint. My parents never once asked him to contribute. He's sensitive, Mom would say. He's just not built for pressure. But I was. I was the pressure valve, the backup plan, the golden goose with a cracked shell. Then, last month, I got the call that tipped everything over. Mom and Dad were facing foreclosure. Their second mortgage had ballooned. They were also 6 months behind on property taxes. Creditors were calling. They needed a wire transfer, $78,000, by the end of the week, or they'd lose everything. They didn't ask. They demanded. And for the first time in my life, I said, no. No, I wasn't going to empty my savings. No, I wasn't going to take out a personal loan to cover their mistakes. No, I wasn't going to sell my car or move in with a friend temporarily to make their disaster more comfortable. And that's when they showed me who they really were. The love turned into venom overnight. My mom cried, accused me of being ungrateful. My father told me I'd never understand what it means to be a man. Josh texted me a string of insults I didn't bother replying to. Then the group chat message came. If you walk away from this, you're no son of mine. They meant it. By the next day, I was blocked on my mom's Facebook. My aunt sent me a furious message. Josh posted a cryptic status about snakes in the family. The smear campaign was subtle but effective. I was cut out, but not broken. For the first time in years, I wasn't being pulled in 10 directions. I wasn't checking my balance every night wondering what fire I'd be asked to put out next. I was just breathing. And then, a week later, I found something in my inbox. An anonymous email. Subject line. Thought you should know. Attached was a screenshot. My parents sitting at a fancy restaurant smiling with a group of people I didn't recognize. One of them was tagged in another post. Always great to celebrate successful deals with the best. It wasn't a mistake. They weren't broke. They were hiding something. And suddenly, this wasn't just about saying no. This was about the truth. And I was done playing the obedient son. I stared at the screenshot again, trying to wrap my head around it. There they were, Mom, Dad, and even Josh, dressed in evening wear, seated at a white tablecloth restaurant I instantly recognized. Levier's was one of the most expensive restaurants in our city. I had taken a client there once for work and nearly choked when I saw the bill. The caption on the Friends post read, "To closing deals and new beginnings." New beginnings? I zoomed in on the wine bottle that sat in the middle of the table. Chateau Margaux. Retail, around $700. One bottle. So much for foreclosure. My stomach twisted. I wasn't just angry. I was betrayed. Not just by the lie, but by how effortlessly they cast themselves as victims while living like nothing had happened. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was fraud, and I had unknowingly enabled it for years. I didn't respond to the anonymous email, but I started digging. I pulled credit reports, old loan documents, tax filings, things I'd helped with over the years. I looked deeper this time. And it didn't take long before I found patterns. Bank transfers that didn't make sense, wire transfers from Josh's supposed businesses into shell accounts, a life insurance policy taken out in my name without my knowledge, listed as co-signer on a property I'd never seen. They had used me, my credit, my signature, my silence. And now that I had refused to keep feeding the machine, they'd discarded me like a burnt fuse. At first, I didn't know what to do. Confronting them directly would go nowhere. They'd spin it, guilt-trip me, maybe even try to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. So I started documenting everything. I created a folder, digitally and physically, backups on encrypted drives, printed copies in a safety deposit box. Every transaction, every document, every forged signature. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I got a call from a collections agency. Apparently, I was the guarantor on a $30,000 small business loan taken out in Josh's name. I hadn't signed anything, except I had, sort of. They'd used a scanned copy of my signature from an old FAFSA form. My hands shook when I hung up the phone. It was one thing to guilt me into money. It was another to steal my identity. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a family issue. It was criminal. I went quiet. Didn't respond to messages. Didn't retaliate. Let them think I was defeated. But beneath the silence, I was building something. Piece by piece, name by name, I followed the paper trail. Shell accounts linked to LLCs. Business registrations in Josh's name, with my address listed as the office. Cash advances processed just days before they claimed to be desperate. It all pointed to a scheme. One I hadn't agreed to, but one that bore my name. And still, they kept playing innocent. They posted about trust and loyalty and family above all on social media. Mom even tagged me in a throwback photo on Facebook with the caption, "No matter what happens, we'll always love you." The comment section was full of pitying relatives and clueless friends. I wanted to scream. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were building a shield, a narrative, in case I ever dared to speak. That's when I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just going to protect myself. I was going to tell the truth. And this time, I wasn't going to whisper it. Revenge, for me, wasn't about screaming or showing up at their door. It wasn't about making a scene at Thanksgiving or blasting them on social media. It was about precision. Because if my family taught me anything, it's that perception is everything. They had built a public mask so convincing, most people didn't realize it was covering rot. So I didn't go after them loudly. I went after the lies quietly, where it hurt most. First, I met with a financial crimes attorney. She wasn't cheap, but she was sharp. I laid out everything: the forged documents, the identity theft, the credit damage, the insurance policy taken out in my name. I showed her the photo of them at Lavier's 2 days after begging for urgent money. She didn't say much at first, just took notes. When she finally looked up, she said, "This isn't just unethical, it's prosecutable." That's all I needed to hear. Together, we filed formal reports with the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We also initiated a police report for identity fraud. I submitted my documentation with notarized statements, timelines, and supporting evidence. But I didn't stop there. Next, I contacted the loan company behind the $30,000 Josh had fraudulently secured with my name. I provided them with a copy of my police report and proof that the signature was reused without consent. The account was flagged for fraud. Collections were halted. An internal investigation was launched. Then, I took it one step further. Remember those shell companies they listed under Josh's name? I traced two of them back to rental properties they had been flipping with a silent partner. That partner, a guy named Mitchell Kearns, had no idea what was going on. I reached out through a friend of a friend and shared the truth. Within 48 hours, he pulled out of their deals and threatened litigation if they involved his name again. But the final blow? I contacted my parents' financial advisor, the same one who had set up the life insurance policy in my name. I told him what happened. At first, he was defensive, but once I showed him the police report, his tone shifted fast. Turns out, if he had known the policy was taken out without my consent, he would have been legally obligated to report it. Now, he was exposed. He canceled the policy and reported them to the insurance commission to cover his own tracks. In 3 weeks, their house of cards began to collapse. Business partners gone, investigations pending, frozen assets, and family friends quietly, cautiously starting to ask questions. But I wasn't done yet. I wrote a letter, a calm, polite, legal-sounding letter. It outlined the charges pending, the damages I'd incurred, and the full total of misused funds tied to my name. Then I gave them a choice. You can cooperate, or you can prepare for court. I sent it certified mail, one to Mom, one to Dad, one to Josh. I didn't expect a reply, but I got one. 3 days later, I received a carefully worded email from my mother, full of concern and confusion. We didn't realize how badly this had affected you. We never meant to hurt you. Can't we just talk, face to face? Classic manipulation. Not a word about what they did. Not a shred of accountability. Just a performance. So I replied with one line. You can speak to my attorney. They wanted to cut me out. I made sure the world saw what that really looked like. And I wasn't finished yet. The hearing wasn't dramatic, at least not in the way courtrooms are portrayed on TV. No shouting, no gasps, just a quiet conference room with legal representatives, paperwork, and the steady tick of a wall clock. Still, the tension was thick. I sat beside my attorney, dressed in a suit I bought the week after I got promoted last fall. On the other side of the table sat my parents and Josh. None of them looked at me. Dad stared at a spot on the floor. Josh fidgeted, pulling at his sleeves. Mom wore her hurt but composed face, as if she were the victim of a misunderstanding. The mediator opened the session. Today we'll be reviewing the claims of financial fraud, identity theft, and misuse of funds brought by Mr. Samuel Lee against the respondents. I kept my hands folded, letting the evidence speak. My lawyer calmly presented the timeline. Co-signed loans never authorized. A life insurance policy forged using my digital signature, the loan company confirming misuse of my identity, bank records showing thousands of dollars funneled through accounts with my name attached, and my credit score plummeting as a result. Then came the kicker, a forensic analysis confirming the signature on the $30,000 loan had been copy-pasted from an old FAFSA form I'd submitted at age 18. A perfect match. That broke the silence. Josh burst out, "That wasn't my idea. Mom said it was fine." "Josh," Mom hissed, gripping his arm. The mediator raised a hand. "Let's keep this civil." My lawyer glanced at me, then back at them. Given the depth of the misuse and the clear pattern of deception, we're prepared to pursue full legal restitution, identity restoration damages, and, if necessary, press charges. However, Mr. Lee has expressed a willingness to settle if the respondents agree to the following terms. She slid the list across the table. Immediate removal of my name from all open financial accounts. Full repayment of outstanding debts taken in my name. a formal written admission of wrongdoing for the record. Agreement to cease all contact going forward. For a moment, all I heard was the shuffle of paper. Then my dad finally spoke, his voice low. "What happens if we refuse?" My lawyer didn't blink. "Then we move forward with criminal prosecution. That includes fraud, identity theft, and possibly conspiracy charges. The documentation is thorough." They didn't speak after that. Within 15 minutes, they agreed to the settlement. It wasn't satisfying in the way I'd imagined. There was no dramatic confession, no weeping apology, but there was something even more powerful: accountability and silence. For the first time in my life, they had nothing left to say. They left the room before I did, heads bowed, papers in hand. I stayed behind a moment longer, watching the door close behind them. Not because I needed closure from them, but because I finally understood I'd never get it. And that was okay. I didn't come to win a war. I came to take my name back. And I had. The settlement agreement took 3 weeks to process. During that time, I focused on rebuilding. My lawyer helped initiate a full credit repair plan, disputing the fraudulent loans, attaching documentation to every flagged account, and freezing access to my credit until further notice. I reported everything to the IRS, too, just in case there were tax filings under my name. There were. Cleaning up their mess wasn't easy, but every paper I filed, every email I sent, felt like another layer of grime being scrubbed off my identity. In the meantime, the silence from my family was absolute. No calls, no emails, no "let's talk this through." They had gone completely dark. It stung at first, because no matter how justified I was, part of me still hoped for something, some acknowledgement, some shred of love that hadn't been tied to a dollar sign. But instead, I got a letter from the insurance company confirming the policy had been voided, the final nail in the coffin of their schemes. And oddly, that's what brought peace. It wasn't a victory parade. It was a quiet reclamation of space. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about what bill would show up with my name on it. I wasn't bracing for a guilt-laced voicemail or another emergency that only I could fix. I could breathe. One day, a package arrived from the collections agency. It contained a letter formally releasing me from liability on the $30,000 loan, and a copy of the signed withdrawal from Josh. No apology, just the facts. That was enough. I put it in a folder marked "Closed." In my apartment, I made changes too. I took down the old photos that reminded me of a family that had stopped being real long ago. I replaced them with moments that mattered, snapshots with coworkers turned friends, a framed certificate from my recent promotion, a print that read, "You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." That quote stayed above my desk. People started to notice a difference in me. My manager asked what had changed. I just said, "I stopped giving to people who only take," and she nodded, like she understood too well. I started cooking again, reading again, laughing again. No one was draining my energy or my wallet. I had finally built a life where the only person I needed to save was myself. 6 months after the settlement, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hi, it's Mom. I was just thinking about you. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't expect it, but because of how unsurprising it felt. There was no acknowledgement of what happened, no mention of what she, Dad, and Josh had done. Just, "Can we talk?" Like the past hadn't cracked something open that could never be sealed again. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed anything from them, not even closure. Instead, I went on with my day. I walked to my favorite cafe, ordered my usual coffee, and sat by the window with a journal I'd started keeping again. Not the kind filled with anxious tally marks of what I'd paid or what I owed, but the kind where I wrote about who I was becoming. There was peace in knowing I didn't have to perform for anyone anymore. No more guilt for saying no, no more debt disguised as duty, no more being the financial backup plan for people who never planned to protect me. I had drawn the line and kept it. A few weeks later, I got a letter, handwritten, from my aunt, my mom's younger sister, who had always been a little on the outside of the family circus. She wrote, "I heard what happened. I want you to know I saw how much they leaned on you. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I'm proud of you for walking away. That takes more courage than staying ever did." I cried when I read it, not because it reopened the wound, but because someone had seen the truth and said it out loud. Sometimes, that's all you need. Not a parade, just proof that you weren't imagining the weight you carried. After that, I began to let go in bigger ways. I stopped checking their social media accounts, stopped replaying conversations in my head, stopped hoping they would suddenly become people who could love without control. Instead, I poured myself into what was ahead. The credit repair wrapped up. My score was climbing again. I used some of my bonus to enroll in a financial literacy program, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to help others who'd been used like I was. I started volunteering as a mentor for women recovering from financial abuse. Every time I heard someone say, "I didn't know it was wrong until it broke me," I understood, and I told them what I learned the hard way. Love that comes with a price tag isn't love, it's leverage. I don't tell people the full story unless they ask. But when they do, I don't flinch. I don't apologize. I say, my family made me their safety net. Then they cut me loose when I refused to be one. And I smile when I say it. Because I'm not just free. I'm whole. And for the first time in my life, my stability, financial, emotional, spiritual, is mine alone. They disowned me to protect their illusion, but I walked away to protect my truth. And I wouldn't trade that for anything.